What sets the story off is someone taking somebody else's identity. I've been thinking about this for years because every time I've arrived at an airport somewhere and seen that line of people holding up cards with names on, I've been tempted to go up to someone holding up a card with somebody else's name on and say, I am that person, to see what it would be like to step into somebody else's life. And also just to see how far I got before I was caught out. But of course I'm really far too timid and too law-abiding to do anything like that. But the great advantage of being a novelist is you can have characters who do the things you wouldn't dare to do yourself. So that was why I wrote, that's how I came upon the idea for the story. It often happens that in life that people do assume other people's identity, usually for malicious reasons, to make money, to steal your virtual identity or whatever online. And usually people who do it have some idea of the identity they're taking over. They know what sort of person they're trying to pass themselves off as. The man in my book, Oliver Fox, has a harder task because he's doing it absolutely just because the idea comes into his head, not because he hopes to make anything out of it, and because he hasn't the faintest idea who he's supposed to be. He just knows he's taken over the name Dr. Norman Wilfred, but who Dr. Norman Wilfred is, even what sort of doctor he is, he has no idea at all. And he's got to try and work it out from the clues he gets from the people he meets. A lot of people have suggested that I wrote the novel and set it in a Greek island just to cash in on the Greek economic crisis. It takes longer to write a novel than it does to go bankrupt. And when I began the novel, I don't think anyone had realised what a mess the Greek economy was in. And as I got to the end of it, the problems in Greece began to emerge. And I thought, far from being an advantage, this was a disaster because Greece was going to go off the euro. Euros are mentioned several times in the book. They're going to be back on the drachma. And it was going to look like a historical novel. Well, up to now, as you know, thanks to the efforts behind the scenes of Faber to keep the Greek economy on its feet, we've still got euros in Greece. Whether we'll still have euros by the time the paperback comes out, I don't know. I've written various different sorts of things in my life, plays as well as novels and some serious books. And all I can do is follow the idea that happens to fall into my head. And afterwards I look back and see that often it's the same theme that's occurred in the plays and the books, and indeed even in the philosophy. And it's often something to do with the way human beings shape the world around them. It seems to me what's characteristic of human beings is that they're active participants in the world. A lot of authors write about human beings as if they're completely passive, as if they just sit there and terrible things happen to them. But it seems to me that what really characterizes us is that all the time we've got a project, we're trying to do something, even if it's simply to understand the world we're looking at. And until we begin to understand it, in a sense, that world doesn't exist. We are very active participants in our own lives. I always intended Skios as a novel rather than a play, partly because it's an experiment to see whether you can write farce as a book. In the theatre, farce depends very heavily on the infectious effect of laughter. Someone's just written a book, in fact, that demonstrates that laughter is basically infectious. One person laughing sets off another. Well, that in the theatre, when the hysteria begins to happen on stage in a farce, so it spreads among the audience. Can you do the same in a book where you've got only an audience of one at any one time? So it's not just an entertainment novel, it's a serious literary experiment. I always wanted to write novels I can't remember when the idea first came into my head, but certainly as a teenager, I was already trying to start writing short novels. And then, beginning of my professional career, I was a journalist, and I eventually tried to reduce the amount of journalism I was doing in order to start writing novels. But at that time, I hated the theatre. I'd had a failure with a student show, and I think it had made me feel sour grapes about the theatre. And I didn't get round to writing plays until my late 30s, which is very late. Most playwrights start when they're young. It tends to be a young person's activity. And then for a long time, I wrote plays, and I couldn't write novels. For some reason, the author's voice seemed to have gone. And when I did start writing novels again, it was by doing it through the characters, getting one of the characters, or more than one of the characters, to tell the story, which is a bit of a cheat. And Skios is the first novel I've written in the third person for many, many years, since before I started writing plays. I think anyone who writes a play is sometimes surprised by the reaction of the audience. Often the audience doesn't laugh at things you thought were going to be funny, but quite often too they laugh at things that hadn't ever seemed to be funny. They're just setting up the plot. And of course a lot turns on expectation. Someone wrote a review of Skios recently, in which he talked about going to see a production of Noises Off, a farce I wrote. And because the audience were familiar with the idea of Noises Off, because they knew it was a farce, they knew it was supposed to be a funny play, as he pointed out, they started to laugh at the very beginning of the play before anything funny has happened at all, just because they knew this was supposed to be funny. It all goes to reinforce the idea that what sets off laughter is laughter. One of the problems about a new work, a new book or a new play is people don't know whether it's supposed to be funny or not, and it takes some time for them to accept what the genre of the piece is. I think everyone, all authors must be surprised by reactions to books, whether they're good or they're bad. And I suppose all authors feel anxious. They fear that the new book isn't going to be liked by anybody. So I, on the whole, have been very pleased that people seem to have liked Skios.